To Nine's political editor, Chris Uhlmann, who this week in the Sydney Morning Herald wrote a thought-provoking column on Western culture and the thought police who love to topple statues. The godlessness of Australia is often celebrated by those whose main interest in the past seems to be toppling statues and ransacking textbooks for thought crimes. The erasers claim to be champions of justice, but they are its executioners. History's real heroes have been the great informers, not the nihilists. We live in an age that's happy to celebrate the history and the mythology of every culture, but our own. Uhlmann makes the point Australia has more freedoms and benefits than most countries. Western thinking evolved the novel idea that the best form of government recognised the dignity and rights of each individual and offered them the protection of the law. Yet the intellectual project of some now appears to be the great unmaking of society, but they offer no viable alternative. They make a desert and call it progress. Uhlmann made good points that a normal person would surely believe to be wholly uncontroversial. And you can tell the points were sharp and effective because they sent Twitter journalists into a spin. ABC Sydney presenter Wendy Harmer tweeted in an expletive-ridden rant that she felt like punching a wall at 5 a.m. after reading the article. To suggest that it's only Western thinking that's able to create a just society, flat-out BS. So much of the misery inflicted on human society worldwide has come out of Europe, she said. How ironic. By focusing on the aberrations of Western society, Harmer inadvertently proved Uhlmann's point. But then this from former Insiders host Barrie Cassidy. Whatever criticisms are made of China, and it's a long list to choose from, they have lifted 700 million people out of poverty, a small contribution to a more just society. China, a more just society? Where does one start with that? First, anyone attempting to paint the rise of China as a rosy story of economic success and ignoring the fact the extraordinary GDP growth the nation has experienced is due to the economic predation of its own people. Judging the fiscal well-being of a country's people purely on GDP is becoming an increasingly outdated mode of economic analysis. Particularly when in China, you cannot truly and independently own any business free from fear it can be seized at any moment. But more to the point, British economist Sir Charles Bean wrote in 2016 that you must only use a GDP rise as a summary static for a nation's economic health. Importantly, GDP does not reflect economic inequality or sustainability environmentally, financial or otherwise. That aside, in his defence of China as a society, a just society, Barrie Cassidy doesn't even have his numbers right. According to China's own National Bureau of Statistics from last year, only 400 million Chinese are categorised as middle-income earners. So Cassidy is only 300 million off. But the real problem is that China's own definition of poverty is so different to ours. To enter the middle-class category, a family of three collectively has to earn more than 100,000 yuan. And that's just 15,000 US dollars for an entire family to live on each year. Hardly middle class by any international standard. And is China a just nation, or even more just? Well, not for the Muslim minorities enduring hell in the Chinese province Xinjiang right now.
Terzanai Zaiwuddin is reliving a story she can barely bring herself to tell. She was held at one of Xinjiang's so-called re-education camps. These satellite images show the site where Terzanai says she was held, sharing a cell with 13 other women. She's haunted by one image, masked men coming down a camp corridor like this one after midnight.
They were three men. Not one, but three. They did whatever evil their mind could think of.
How much hatred must you have for your own country to defend and deflect from that horror? The ABC has plenty of fine journalists, but when these ego-crazed presenters enter the Twitter sphere, they let every single one of them down. Kel, what do you make of the commentary? Did you read Chris's piece?
Yes.
Did you think the criticisms were fair?
Of course they weren't, and it's a really good piece. And this is my theory. If you read down the piece, part of what he's saying, defending our country and our civilisation that they hate, is he's saying It's been built for 1,000 years or more on Christian values and the Christian ethos. Now, there are some people for whom that is unbearable. I mean, those people must be having a horrible day today. There are 2.3 billion with a B, people around the world celebrating Good Friday, right? 2.3 billion Christians around the world. That must really annoy these people. And when they see someone like Chris Uhlmann, who is thoughtful and has common sense and talks about what's happening in our world and what our heritage is, saying, look, a lot of it's built on those values, on the teachings of Christ. When they see that, they just go bananas. They can't cope with that. I think a lot of their attacks, maybe I'm being unfair, but I think a lot of their attacks are based on the fact they want to destroy the old foundations. You can't build a totally new society, which is what they want to do, unless you destroy what's already there. He was spot on. Chris Uhlmann was spot on when he talked about nihilists, destroyers rather than builders. That's our worry, that there are destroyers who want to wipe out what we've got without recognising what we've got and without understanding what a massive change that would be at the end of human rights and human dignity.
I agree. And I mean, the piece itself was intellectual. It was well written. It was well researched. It was thought provoking. Don't we need more of that discourse? Why were people so offended by it, Rebecca?
Well, I used to do some work for the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilization, and when I saw the outrage that provoked in universities, that we would even have a centre to study Western civilization, you realise where these people are coming from. It's not that we are saying that there isn't such a thing as Western barbarism, but the great gift that we have developed, and I'll put in a word for the Jews here because we're also celebrating Passover. More than 3,000 years ago, it was about the liberation and the redemption of Israelites who were slaves in Egypt. And the Jewish people and the Christians who've inherited that tradition have been defending that ever since. It is such a marvellous thing. More than 3,000 years ago, it was truly revolutionary. Sadly, it's still the case today that there are many people who don't have that freedom. It's a pity more people in Australia can't, at the ABC at least, can't recognise that.
Well said.